What do you mean by pollination? Pollination, basically, it is a process of the process of transferring of pollen grains from anther to stigma is called pollination. Pollination, basically a process. It is a process in which from the anther pollen grain comes out, reaches to the stigma of a female reproductive system. So this transferring process called as pollination. All right. Now we have different types of pollination. What are the types of pollination? Autogamy, gytonogamy, xenogamy, right? These are the various types. Autogamy further divided into two types, clistogamy and chasmogamy. Okay, this autogamy further divided into clisto and chasmogamy. Again, here you have three types: autogamy, gytonogamy and xenogamy, right? What is autogamy? These are the types of pollination. Autogamy is the transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of same flower. कैसे याद रहेगा? ऑटो का मतलब क्या होता है? सेल्फ. अब ये नहीं कि ऑटो मतलब जो ऑटो रिक्शा, हम उसकी बात नहीं कर रहे. ऑटो मीन्स सेल्फ. जैसे प्लांट्स हमारे ऑटोट्रॉफ होते हैं ना, दे प्रिपेयर देयर फूड बाय देमसेल्फ फोटोसिंथेसिस से. तो उसी तरह ऑटोगैमी मीन्स सेल्फ. नाउ if the pollen grain transfer from anther to stigma of same flower, that is called autogamy. ठीक है, जैसे सपोज करिए, here you have a flower, okay, here you have anther and here you have a pistil. So pollen grain यहाँ से निकला and attaches to the stigma of the same flower. This is autogamy. Further autogamy divided into clisto and chasmogamy. Clisto, the flower which do not open. Now suppose what happen? अभी जो फ्लावर है ना वो बड स्टेज में, मतलब फ्लावर ओपन ही नहीं हुआ, ऐसे ही है फ्लावर, अंदर ही अंदर अगर ट्रांसफर हो जाता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड क्लिस्टो. मतलब अभी फ्लावर ओपन नहीं हुआ है, ठीक है, खिला नहीं है फूल, फ्लावर इज इन लाइक दिस स्टेज ओनली. So within that bud stage only, if the transfer, if the pollen transfer to the stigma of same flower, अब खुला नहीं है तो बंद है, तो उसी के यहीं से निकला और इसी में चला गया, तो क्लिस्टोगैमी. कैस्मोगैमी में now what happen? Flower open, flower खुल जाता है and the exposed anther and stigma and anther exposed होते हैं and there the transfer takes place. So this is called chasmogamy. Okay. They both are the example of what? Example of autogamy. Gytonogamy is what? Transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of different flower of same plant. Right? Now suppose you have a plant, you have a flower, 2 and 3 flower. What is these? These are the flower. Okay. So now if the pollen grain comes out from one flower, reaches to, these are what? Pollen grain. So pollen grain from one flower reaches to the stigma of another flower of same plant. This condition is called as gytonogamy. This is what? Gytonogamy. Right? What is xenogamy? What do you mean by xenogamy, guys? Transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma of different plants flower of same species. So that is called xenogamy. Now suppose you have two plants. This is one, this is another. Okay, flower of same species. So from here, this is flower 1, this is flower 2 plant. From here, the pollen grain reaches to this. So this condition called as xenogamy. Okay, इसे क्या कहते हैं? Xenogamy कहते हैं. So see here, first of all, what happened? Same flower पे same stigma पे आ रहे हैं. So what is this A? A condition is what? This is autogamy. Okay. Now from same plant another flower, right? And this is what? Geitonogamy. Geitonogamy. From here to here, xenogamy. So this you have to remember. Sometime directly you will get a question like what do you mean by auto, gaetano or xenogamy? What are the agents of pollination? See, agent means the carrier, right? Who carries these pollen grain towards the stigma? एक तो होता है कि चलो ठीक है, pollen grain को कोई तो चाहिए होगा ना स्टिग्मा तक पहुंचाने के लिए, राइट? सम कैरियर, सम व्हीकल. इफ यू वांट टू गो समवेयर, यू रिक्वायर्ड सम व्हीकल ना. So similarly, pollen grain also requires some vehicle through which it reaches to the stigma of another flower. That vehicle is nothing but the agent only. Okay, ये vehicle क्या है? These vehicles are the agent only. Now includes abiotic and biotic factor. So now these agents are biotic also and abiotic also. Biotic means living beings, right? अगर कोई living organism है, if the pollen grains are carried to living organism, they are called as biotic agent or biotic pollinating agent. If they are carried via abiotic or non-living agents, they are called abiotic. So if the pollen grains are carried through water and wind, abiotic. Insects, butterfly, honeybee, biotic. They include biotic agents. Okay. So now based on that, based on these agents, we have a different adaptation to the pollination, that is wind pollination. What is wind pollination? Pollen grains, light, non-sticky and winged. Suppose what happens if the pollen grains are carried through wind. Okay, हवा के through, हवा के माध्यम से अगर pollen grain पहुंच रहे हैं स्टिग्मा तक, तो they are considered as what? Wind pollination. इस केस में जो pollen grain होता है वो कैसा होना चाहिए? Obviously it must be very lightweight, है ना, उसमें wings होने चाहिए. So the pollen grain is lightweight, non-sticky and winged. Anther well exposed, anther पूरा open होना चाहिए, तभी तो pollen grain निकल के जाएंगे. Stigma large and feathery. So now the flower, the stigma which will carry those pollen, they must have large surface and they must have a feather so that the pollen grain attaches to them. Flower has one ovule arranged as inflorescence like corn, cob, cotton, date, palm. So these are the examples which undergo wind pollination, and these are the adaptation of pollen grain, anther, stigma and flower. Water pollination, bryophytes, pteridophytes and algae. So here they undergo water pollination. That means in these plants, the pollen grain reaches to the female, or you can say female reproductive part, through water. तो पानी के माध्यम से pollen grain वहां तक पहुंच रहे हैं. Pollen grains protected by mucilaginous covering. तो म्यूकस की, अब यहाँ पे जो पॉलिन ग्रेन्स होते हैं ना, उनके चारों तरफ एक म्यूसिलीज कवरिंग होनी चाहिए, राइट? दे हैव अ म्यूसिलीजिनस कवरिंग. फ्रेश वाटर प्लांट लाइक वैलिसिनेरिया, हाइड्रिला, sea grass, Jostera. These examples are very important. So directly they will give you some example and they will ask you which plant undergo water pollination. So Velicinera, Hydrilla, Jostera, they undergo water pollination. Insect pollination. Flowers are large, colorful, right? If the pollen grain reaches through insect, so in that case the flowers are very large, then only very colorful, then only the insects will attract to that flower only na. Fragment, अच्छी खुशबू होनी चाहिए, rich in nectar, pollen grain sticky होने चाहिए, then only they attach to the wings of insect or the leg of insects, right? Stigma sticky होनी चाहिए. So these are some of the adaptation of the flower, adaptation of the reproductive part and the pollen grains for pollination, wind, insects and the water pollination.
अब एग्जाम की तैयारी को और बेहतर करने के लिए हमारे चैनल को लाइक, शेयर और सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें।